Hello and hi and howdy. So at the beginning of this video, I am going to be comparing various mediums to each other. I mean the mediums themselves, like books versus films versus video games versus webcomics at one point. So if you're not here for any of that stuff, and you would very specifically like to see only the stuff that pertains to Baldur's Gate, skip to this time code and, have a good time. Elsewise, prepare to hear me geek out for 10 minutes. Guess who's back? Back again. It's Super Dude here to talk about what y'all will probably think is a pretty nerdy subject, but I find it enjoyable, so here I go! Stories are a form of communication that we all partake in to some degree, and given that you're watching videos in the game design corner of YouTube, you probably enjoy a particular type of story medium above the others, that being video games, whether that's because of the game, the narrative, or some mix between the two. That word is a rough one, medium, because it is used all over the place in science. It has taken on a load of meanings. Generally, it means either the middle of two extremes like a volume knob, or a material through which the thing we actually care about travels. Electrons flow through the medium of a copper wire, which is what allows for electricity to be a thing. The medium, in this case, is copper. For today, we're looking at mediums through a media art and communications bend, where the medium is the method through which we deliver a story. Though not always a story, sometimes it's an informative piece, instructions, whatever. But the medium can have pretty significant impacts on how some pieces of media can be presented and structured. This medium is what I'd like to talk about, because the medium is super important to how a story can be told. Take, for example, a book. A book is a pretty fantastic medium for telling stories. It can be as long as it desires, make worlds that are incredibly detailed and fractal-like in their design due to the fact that you must use your imagination to represent them. Books are just words after all, so they focus on using words the goodest they can so their message is clear. Books can be picked up and put down, re-experienced at a later date, pored over again and again. Books also allow for a greater sense of interiority with the ability to exist completely inside of the head of the character, hearing their every thought and impulse. For an example of this in action, I recommend Folding Ideas' lukewarm defense of 50 Shades of Grey, and how the lack of interior voice from Anastasia actually makes it a better story. But books are also more private than most forms of media storytelling. People have made various attempts at making reading more social through book clubs or simply reading aloud to each other like you would to children, but that's not the most common way to consume books. Book clubs give a reason to read, because that's what some people need to feel the motivation, us being social creatures and all. And to flip the positives of books on their head, some are too long, and if you lack imagination, a book may be an unfulfilling read for you. Some people suffer from aphantasia, which is a condition where they literally can't form imagery in their heads. I knew someone with aphantasia who told me their mind palace was just words, and that's what their imagination looked like. Their brain was a book, and therefore the act of reading is a completely different style of experience for them. Books are deeply subjective in this way. You can take completely different emotions and meanings from reading the exact same sentence because of individual styles of reading, life experiences, and brain chemistry, on top of a myriad other factors as well. This is less the case for another popular medium style, film. Real quick, just to blow your brain up, ever think about how a movie is called a move-e? It's like naming the walkie-talkie. Someone looked at the collection of images that simulate movement and then just called them movers. Anyway, movies and television are different in very key ways from books. For one, both the script that I wrote and the audio software I'm using to record this cost me no money, so other than the electricity used to power a computer, this is essentially a free process. But every second of a TV show or movie costs a great deal of money, so there's a financial hurdle that they have to clear first. Movies are time-bound, where every time I watch The Martian, it is exactly 2 hours and 24 minutes, and that is time I have to set aside to consume it. A book can last as long as I want to. The Martian lasts 2 hours and 24 minutes, no matter how I slice it. Films are also locked constructs in terms of what's on screen. The experience you have internally during a film may be different. When I watched the Barbie movie, I was in awe of the beauty and subtlety of Barbie's first real moments taking in the real world, with all of its good and bad parts. The teens 4 rows ahead of me were bored and thought that it was funny to make jokes during this scene. But despite our different takeaways, Barbie was the same thing on screen for the both of us. Just like books, we arrived at different conclusions, but this time it wasn't reading style or imaginations conjuring up different entire realities, but a difference in how we consumed the static reality of what's on screen. Books are more fluid because the story process happens in here, but for films, it is on screen. far more concrete than the imagination. For some of film's issues, we have that time-bound bit again, positives becoming negatives. Sure, a film is the same length every time, but what if it's a very long film? How often do people watch The Lord of the Rings unless they're setting time aside for it? How many fans of One Piece have heard people go, no, that's too long for me? All medium strengths tend to be weaknesses as well. Since length is such an issue, you'll find most film adaptations have to majorly pare down a book or comic series into only its skeleton, making a less rich but more easily consumed experience. While what's to film may be a fantastic adaptation, it's missing the depth of its wordy, bookish, or comic counterpart, which is, of course, why we've all heard the expression, the book is better than the movie. And since movies are time-bound, there are some types of stories that just can't be told in film. Take, for example, S, written by Doug Dorst and conceived of by J.J. Abrams. S is actually a book called Ship of Theseus, written by some dude, who cares, but there are notes in the margins by two other characters, Eric and Jen. The author of this fictional book was a very secretive person, and they died mysteriously at some point in the past. And Eric is trying to find hints to this author's life and perhaps their death in his works. Jen, who picks up the book much later, converses with Eric and ends up being pulled in with him. This is a story that doesn't follow linear time, with Eric and Jen's pen colors denoting different spans of time as they visit and revisit the pages of the book. Could the story be adapted to film? No, not at all, and in fact, that's partially the point. J.J. Abrams thought of the concept of the book as a physical object, with its margins and various pieces inside impossible to turn into a digital object. While this is meant to be in contrast to the ebook, it works just as well in that this isn't really possible to translate to film, at least not easily. The movie would be two characters reading a book and writing in the margins. It would just be one library with two people in it, for the entire length of the film. The time-bound nature of movies means time travel is also hard to pull off, because we experience time linearly, as does film. There aren't a lot of time travel movies for just this reason. You need to keep time travel pretty simple for it to work. Take Edge of Tomorrow, a film where the main character continuously goes back in time to a specific starting point until they succeed in their task of saving the world. That's pretty easy to handle in terms of time travel. It's always going back to the same start. Contrast that with the literary work of Homestuck and try to tell me the amount of time travel in this is even remotely parsable at a glance. It is a much harder thing to grok, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is a webcomic. A page would release, and then you could hang on that page forever. Revisit every single other page before it and update your time travel chart with new info. Homestuck is fantastic at this, and it's part of why Homestuck was such a big success in the webcomic space. For further reading, I recommend Homestuck Made This World, a podcast in the Range Touch Network talking about Homestuck as it was coming out and contextualizing it in its moment for those who missed the whole thing. They have some interesting conversation about mediums, specifically the webcomic mediums as well as forums, and how we don't have those things anymore, so give it a listen if any of this sounds interesting to you. I'd forgive you if you thought this was just me geeking out over mediums. No, I do have a point in talking about all this. The main medium of this video, this channel, and my life has been video games, and God, what a different sort of medium we have here. In games, you have agency, meaning you control the actions made by certain characters within the world, whether that be one, many, all of them, or none, being a sort of god entity that directs rather than directly controls. It's one of the many mediums where the story actually involves you in that way. The other being, games. The board game ones, the play pretend ones, the pen and paper ones. This allows for a greater sense of empathy with the characters of the tale, given that you either directly control them, or in some camera schemes, you are them, rivaling the sense of interiority that books can give, almost to an uncomfortable degree. For those who want to know what I'm talking about with that, play Hellblade. This closeness with the character can be pretty powerful for making you feel something when playing games, as evidenced by the fact that game narratives have been, as a whole, pretty bunk. The game story isn't really why most people play games, but it manages to work for people anyway thanks to the greater sense of empathy you feel from partaking in the experience yourself. Games are also unbound to time, like books, so you can spread the experience out over longer. Experience Skyrim at your leisure. I know someone who played 1,000 hours of Skyrim and never beat it. Never saw this area. And right now I'm talking about just the big games. There are some games that are only an hour long, 20 minutes long, or hundreds of hours of content. Game length isn't a given. It can be whatever the designer or parent company wants it to be. Plus, it allows for styles of storytelling that are harder to pull off in other mediums. Valve is famous for its use of environmental storytelling, where you are told quite little explicitly, and discovering the secrets of the world you're in requires your own attention to the environment. Video games, thanks to their agency, allow for styles of story that are much harder or impossible to pull off in other mediums. But that same agency can be a trap. Take Resident Evil Village as an example. Ethan Winter's face is never revealed during the original run of 7 and Village. He is someone you inhabit completely in the first person, which is likely meant to help you identify with him. His relatively calm demeanor in the face of the absolute carnage that is RE7 speaks to this. He doesn't scream, because in theory, you are. But there was a shift in RE Village where they decided to give him way more personality, and this means he reacts oddly. His absolutely cartoonish, breathy response to a dead body, despite coming across multiple in his previous outing, his muted response to his own wife's murder, and his quips after every single boss fight. This guy ain't that guy, and the fact that I inhabit him only makes this distinction more noticeable because I am his eyeballs. I see everything. So why bring any of this up? It is easiest to see the comparison between the strengths and weaknesses of mediums when we look at adaptations, stories that jump from their original mediums to new ones. For video games, that means we're usually adapting a movie, a book, or a movie adaptation of a book. Life is Weird. Or in the case of the recent Baldur's Gate 3, not really any of those things, but an entire system of design borrowed from the tabletop role-playing game space. If you don't know, tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs, are games you play with pencil and paper, dice, and various other doodads with yourself and others, usually in a party doing capital S something. It's different from game to game. In the modern day, the pencil, paper, and dice can all be simulated quite nicely with various virtual tabletops, or VTTs, but the principle is the same. There are many, many different systems, each doing something a bit different or chasing a different style of cooperation or fantasy. Call of Cthulhu is about normal, everyday humans confronting the dangerous new world of cosmic horror, and a system that encourages mystery solving and lots of death. Vampire the Masquerade is a system where you play vampires, dealing with the political intrigue of vampires doing vampire things in a supernatural version of our world. Pathfinder is a crunchy system where you and your mates are fantasy beings, elves, dwarves, goblins, and humans in a high fantasy world full of treasure to find and quests to be had. As a quick aside, I'll be going through some lingo throughout this video, so when you hear that pop from earlier, that's lingo, and I'll explain it in text form on screen. And the most well-known TTRPG from which Pathfinder is an offshoot is Dungeons & Dragons, which was also the first TTRPG. Dungeons & Dragons, hereafter abbreviated as D&D, and specifically its most recent 5th edition, is the game system which Baldur's Gate 3 is adapting, and has taken great pains in doing so. Larian Studios has been eyeing the D&D IP ever since they produced the original Divinity back in 2014. They successfully landed the IP during the production of Divinity 2 somewhere before 2017. So it took 6 years for Baldur's Gate 3 to come out of its development cycle, which is beyond typical. In fact, its development in general isn't typical, with the game being available in early access for almost 3 years at this point. No doubt that extra money and community stress testing helped development, and the community having eyes on the project for so long helped generate interest in the new release in the D&D video game canon. All of this effort was made to help develop the richest possible setting for someone to experience D&D in, and really give players the greatest depth of choice and variation so they can feel that each playthrough is their own. Larian has taken the design framework of the CRPG and stretched it as far as it could to make a game that truly embodies the idea of player expression and choice more than any other so far, and that isn't as hyperbolic as you may be thinking. There's been a lot of discourse around this game concerning the fact that Larian's amount of funding, its development, the length of this game's production, everything about it makes it a monster in the CRPG space. For more context, watch Noodle's most recent video on the subject. To put it simply, Baldur's Gate 3 is a product of the stars aligning, and few studios will ever get the opportunity to even attempt to make something like Baldur's Gate 3 again. For this reason, it is folly to compare Baldur's Gate 3 to any other CRPG. Don't do it. It's like comparing A Hat in Time to Super Mario Odyssey. Unless there's a very specific point you're trying to make, you know you're being an ass doing this. But the opposite side of that statement is that this is about as close to Larian's version of the perfect D&D adaptation that we've ever seen before. There is no better candidate for comparing the two mediums than Baldur's Gate 3, and that's not all. Around half a year before Baldur's Gate 3's release, we also got a different D&D adaptation to the medium of film with Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, which goes about its adaptation different from the other one thanks to the strengths and weaknesses of film compared to games or tabletop. That is what I plan to do here today. By playing, watching, and playing D&D, I hope to show the ways games or films successfully convert the experience of Dungeons & Dragons around the table with friends or acquaintances at a local shop into different mediums, in some ways that it could never hope to pull that off. Quick disclaimer, and this is not the last time you're going to hear me say this in this video, the things that I'm going to say are not admonishments. I basically have no ill will towards Baldur's Gate in any way at all. I think it's a fantastic game, probably deserving of the 10 out of the 10 that most people give it. After all, it is a product of the stars aligning. No, the things that I'm going to point out are either disadvantages of games as a medium that Baldur's Gate obviously has by being a game, or things that it could never hope to adapt because it's a game and it can't perfectly do what the TTRPG version of D&D can do. This is an exercise in trying to think of the ways that mediums are different because that's fun, and I don't know, I just think it's fun. Let's start with Table D&D. D&D, and indeed most tabletops, are games where the game is mostly happening in your head, imagining the actions and coming up with solutions to the problems on the fly. One person, the GM, is running the game. They read a book about the world you're playing in, or maybe even created it themselves, and they're the ones telling you the story, running every single monster and villain, and adjudicating the rules and outcomes to every roll as they come up. This person obviously has the most authority at the table, being the one that's running the game, but it's important to note that they are also here to play it. If they aren't having fun, they're not going to want to run the game, and then there's no game at all. There's a lot of work and buy-in that one specific player must do for any TTRPG to run at all, so this person, more likely than not, is very opinionated and obsessed with the game than any other characters given their buy-in. This is common in the TTRPG space. So the GM is telling you the setting, the characters, and the various situations you find yourself in, and you tell them how your character would react. If the action you take is one of narrative consequence or has a chance of failure, you need to roll for it with one of these silly rocks. For D&D, this one is the one you roll to determine success, the D20. Your GM tells you what skill you use for the situation, you roll, then add or subtract the skill on your sheet to modify the die. The GM already had a number in their head when they asked you to roll in the first place, and if you passed that number, you succeeded in your action, and the GM describes your success and the consequences of that action, and everyone goes back and forth like this until it's 11 p.m. and it's time to stop playing. It is this tango between GM and the player that creates the story of the game. So far, I've been describing basically every TTRPG, but D&D's specific bent is one of magic, loot, and fighting. Lots of fighting, actually. Being the original TTRPG, it had to spawn from something else, and D&D was actually a fantasy modification of the wargame Chainmail. This had consequences. Wargames are predominantly interested in two things: authentic representation of battlefields, and also fighting with your little guys. And D&D took that with it. To this day, D&D can be separated into two, technically three, but mostly two layers. The story, where everyone is throwing out their actions fast and loose and everything's a vibe and a half, and then combat, where the rules get a lot more rigid and mathy. There's an initiative to determine a turn order between all enemies and all allies, a specific set of actions that can be performed with multiple types of actions available to you, with some choices available to all and some being specific to your class, your species, or even more specific choices you made, giving each character a distinct action economy, or the suite of actions they can do at any one point on their turn. Most of the pages of your classes are dedicated to your combat abilities, as are a significant amount of the books, because D&D 5th edition is at least 50% this crunchy combat, if not more. It used to be even more crunchy than it is right now. This is how D&D was for years and years and years. And then the most recent 5th edition came out, and a new wave of people started playing, drawn in by a combination of Stranger Things, and Critical Role, and probably some third thing people will get mad at me for not mentioning. This new wave brought with them a renewed interest in D&D as a storytelling device. And now D&D is known not just as a fantasy combat simulator or dungeon crawler, but a storytelling system. Not to say it wasn't used for that purpose before, I'm sure it was. It's just that now, that is an accepted way of playing D&D in public consciousness. This also rapidly shifted the way this person, the GM, is taught to run the game. Some of you may have balked at the amount of power the GM has over the experience, and for one, you're absolutely correct in that thinking, and that is inextricable from how these games function. The GM holds a lot of authority over the experience, and can make it suck. Just look up RPG horror stories for how they can do that. In the past, D&D was a system that encouraged punchy combats, singular rolls that, if failed, killed your character outright, or dungeons with inconceivable dangers that destroy you with no method for the player to retaliate. We call these games, and the game masters that run them, bullshit and adversarial GMs, respectively. The type of game where the GM is not only running the villains, but being the villain. The sort of asymmetrical fighting game where one person controls the whole world, and the other side does what they can to thwart them. That's not encouraged behavior nowadays. Now the books speak of being a storyteller, where each person plays their part in creating a memorable story that will leave everyone satisfied. Whatever that means is different from group to group. A classic Lord of the Rings style heroic adventure? How about a small band of mercenaries accidentally caught up in a plot to destroy the world? Political intrigue? Horror? What if we are the bad guys? Some sort of romance plot? I don't know, man. People do all sorts of crazy stuff with this system nowadays. The rules for storytelling kinda got out of the way and left space for people to dream up their own ideas for a world, instead giving inspirational materials for what sort of game they think is worth running. This concept of the rules being more loose and allowing space to imagine or interpret is often called a fluffy system, or one where the system doesn't make rules for every interaction, instead leaving it up to the table to decide or just make it a story beat. This new direction 5th edition took is way fluffier than anything that came before, allowing D&D to be what you make of it. Also, as a quick aside, I just want to step in here and tell you a bit about other RPG systems. D&D is the most well-known TTRPG out there right now, and basically always has been, so because people are comfortable with it, that leads to people trying to make D&D into something it's not pretty often. Stick with what you know and refashion the system into something it's not good at. D&D is a fantasy jack of all trades, but if you're wanting a more specific experience that isn't fantasy, it may behoove you to look somewhere else. Call of Cthulhu, or Talk if you're feeling ribald, is excellent at representing a Lovecraftian horror. Vampires got vampires, what more can I say? Pathfinder is a much more crunchy system that is an offshoot of D&D from its 3.5 edition days. And if you're looking for something that's not crunchy at all and is instead pretty much fluff exclusive for storytelling purposes, you have Apocalypse World and the games that use Apocalypse World's engine as a style of play, which are powered by the apocalypse. There are a lot of other games in this space that deserve attention too, and I encourage you to give them a try, especially given how Wizards of the Coast has acted recently. So please, don't try to bend D&D into a different type of thing than it is. Instead, give your money to some other system and see if it's for you. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. That's Dungeons & Dragons in the tabletop form. But with its recent adaptations, what's successfully converted over, and what is a bit lacking? As I said previously, Baldur's Gate 3 is a really dense package, especially in its first and third acts. Which makes sense for the first, because that's what most people have had access to throughout early access. This is what people have been looking at and testing for 3 years up until this point. And as for the third act, so how does it fare? In terms of role-playing conversation, it does as admirable a job as it could, following a very similar system to Fallout, presenting a collection of choices, denoting which choices are skill-based and which choices are due to your specifics of species, class, or background. These specific options really do have an effect on what you can even experience. For example, my wizard had a pretty normal experience in the Druid's Grove. Trying to talk to the de facto leader brings me against a stone wall of do what must be done. But if you're playing a druid, you can debate this person on druidness and potentially steer them to a different course. It's still a roll of the die either way, but it's a genuinely different option that can change the way the quests go. Now obviously there isn't the infinite choice of the analog of table D&D, but it's doing its best. Maybe the best we've ever seen. Otherwise, this is something you've seen before, in New Vegas or Divinity or Disco Elysium. What makes this one stand out is its production value. Each scene looks cinematic in its presentation. The canned animations look pretty good and certainly don't distract from what's going on, and the entire game is fully voice cast. Except for your insert character, they just bark anytime you make them do anything, which is definitely not annoying. As I said before, Baldur's Gate 3 has a production value which has rarely been met before in CRPGs, so I am reticent to sing those praises too hard. Yes, it is probably the best damn thing I've ever looked at. We must also keep in mind that this game is at an unattainable height and will not be met again by other studios or games anytime soon. This is truly a class of its own. Yes, it is pretty. That is to be expected. But there is a downside to that feeling. In a game that represents such a breadth of options, when it fails to deliver on a choice you'd like to make, you feel that even more intently. Something video games will always suffer from is that they are a computer technology. It is a machine running on ones and zeros. It can't understand the nuance of your choices, it just crunches them into the machine. Take, for example, lying. Conversation is an interesting thing in D&D. You have two skills, persuasion and deception, which are checked against insight. If insight wins, you can read the intent behind the words, but if insight's lower, you only get the words. You're either persuaded convincingly, duped expertly, or as is the case with intimidation, doesn't really matter what you think, I'm gonna hurt you if you don't do what I say. In Baldur's Gate, there's this thing that happens where someone will go, "What you doing here?" and then the game gives you your charisma suite. Which thing do you say here to get out of this? If you pass, you're golden, else you're blocked, or have to fight. It feels a lot like in Fallout, where a charisma build can be considered a "I don't want to do anything" build and you walk past the fun. It's also the issue of lying to save face. Intricacies of verbal misrepresentation the game basically can't account for. Say someone asks you to do something, then someone else asks you to do basically the opposite, but you agree to both parties. The game handles this pretty well actually, and just makes both tasks appear on your journal as if you can complete both of them. Issue is, you can't. One deletes the other by virtue of being opposed. It's a pretty smart solution that gets around the roleplay problem. You lied, but a computer can't tell what the lie is unless it literally screams it at you, like this example here in Mass Effect 2. This gestures towards the fact that a computer can't explain itself. It just is, and there's a chance you misunderstand the meaning behind a prompt and now you're locked into something you didn't intend for. Hope you quick saved. This is an issue with games as a medium. It's a computer. You can't pause the game and ask the person behind the screen, "Hey, what are you talking about?" Those are some of the admittedly smaller issues of Baldur's Gate 3 that may draw you out of the experience, and Baldur's Gate isn't special in this problem, but that also means that this is an issue that can never be fixed. Games, especially games centered around player agency and narrative, have to grapple with this unsolvable problem. What happens if we're misunderstood, or worse, the choices we present to the player aren't representative of what they would actually want to do? Moving away from narrative for the moment, what else does Baldur's Gate 3 have on offer? Oh right, fighting. Just like Table D&D, Baldur's Gate is punch-heavy as a rule, and my god, there's a lot to say about fighting here. The system we see in-game is almost exactly what we see in the table version. Some minor tweaks for balance, and so it works better in a video game setting, but all in all, it's the same. So what makes it worth talking about? In the table version, combat happens with dice. You fight the monsters, you roll to see what happens, you tell the DM your actions. Each player gets a turn, and they all go about fighting, as a team, or not. I'm speaking purely from personal experience, I know this isn't everyone's story, but the people I play with don't tend to think very tactically about their decisions in D&D. Everyone's running around doing their own thing, showing off their cool abilities, and maybe even fighting individual monsters, one on one, on one, on one, on one, on one. I think this has a lot to do with who these people are outside of the game. We all get off work, and now we're blowing off steam. Most people's version of blowing off steam isn't Star Scourge Radon, it's Animal Crossing, or Stardew, or Shipbreaker. These people aren't wanting to use their brains aggressively and coordinate together, I get that. But in a video game, that's not the case. Take the system at hand, with its propensity for teamwork, buffs and debuffs, setups and payoffs, and you know what you get? You get a tactic system, baby! Each character is a pawn on the board with its own special moves and action economy, and your ability to perform setup and payoff is one of the central tenets of combat. Is everybody running around doing their own thing? That may work for the first 5 hours, but good luck with the rest of the game. This is a system which requires your understanding of buffs, forcing advantage, and capitalizing on opportunity in order to win every encounter. It's not easy, and it will take some thought to pass some of these encounters, and that's another difference. Hi, my name is John, otherwise known as Superdude online. I've been running Table D&D for roughly 6 years in my role as the Forever DM, and it's been a pretty wild and fun 6 years so far. But something you must know about me is that I am not a game designer, or more specifically an encounter designer. I'm a 25-year-old who sits in his house for roughly 2 hours a week planning the next session, then I say good enough and push that in front of my players. Baldur's Gate 3, however, is not made by game design enthusiasts with budding YouTube careers, but actual game designers. Which means the combat encounters in that game were, designed, maybe over months of iteration. This means these fights have a lot of polish to them, both in their set dressing, the interactables in the environment, and the enemy abilities. The designers put a lot of thought and effort into making each fight be notable in a different way. There are no worthless fights here. I remember an encounter in the caves where a singular skeleton rose to fight us, but instead of charging at us, it broke a coffin that was nearby, revealing another Skellyman. This skeleton then started running towards other coffins in a chain reaction, and I realized this fight isn't about dispatching some run-of-the-mill Spellingtons, it was keeping them pinned down so they couldn't free 20 of their kin. Or this fight, where giant hook horrors were distracted by a truly terrible boss monster of the Underdark, which allowed me to get a vantage point on them from above and start taking pot shots, only to realize they were much stronger than I thought, and then they started rushing back up to eat me. Jesus, it was terrifying. Oh, and this is a spoiler, skip ahead 30 seconds. This golem, which was invulnerable unless using a lava or giant hammer found in the environment to both weaken the metal to strike at the lava, and then performing that strike, it was crazy good. Even basic fights have a lot on offer because of the elemental system. You see, Larian made the Divinity series first, and those games are pretty aggressive about their elements. Pour oil on the ground, set it on fire. Use a spell to harmlessly drizzle rain over the entire area, then set it alight with lightning. That was their bread and butter, and a lot of those systems naturally came over to here from Divinity. This is the strength of D&D in the video game medium. Each fight is delicately crafted. In Tabletop, you're supposed to get 6 encounters per day in order to keep things balanced. This leads to half-assed, inconsequential fights being made just by virtue of what the book told you to do. My advice? Make fewer fights much harder, but don't forget to throw in some easy stuff now and then so your players can see how strong they've become on their journey. But in Baldur's Gate, even the inconsequential fights have terrain design, elemental system, or something notable in the enemy ranks that help keep each encounter maybe not memorable, but not forgettable. Baldur's Gate follows that advice much more closely by making each interaction an interesting puzzle to chew on and hopefully figure out without multiple deaths happening on your side. D&D's combat system shines in this format because it is D&D at its crunchiest. But what about the world? Baldur's Gate 3 takes place in Faerun, better known for its setting name, the Forgotten Realms. Quick history lesson. The original Forgotten Realms was made by this guy, Ed Greenwood, who started writing about Faerun when he was still in the single digits. He never stopped working on it, further developing the setting when he was introduced to D&D by making it the setting of his games, and eventually publishing content to Dragon Magazine, giving people monsters, magic items, and the like, whilst giving that thing's context within the Forgotten Realms, giving people little clues on this setting that they don't have a picture for yet. After Gygax was pushed out of the business, they were looking for a new default setting for their adventures, and Greenwood's Forgotten Realms checked pretty much every box. Thus, for 2nd edition onward, Forgotten Realms was, more or less, the common established setting for D&D, and that has changed it a lot. Many authors, illustrators, and designers across generations have created for the Forgotten Realms, including some famous characters today that Ed had nothing to do with. This is a strength and a weakness. The Forgotten Realms is the perfect setting for a video game, as it is exceptionally rich with detail and stories that can be told inside of it. But also, Forgotten Realms is default D&D. It doesn't stray in any way from the source. This is D&D as you'll read it and see it normally, including in some of its questionable representation of sentient monsters. When I say sentient monsters, I'm talking gnolls, goblins, orcs, creatures with the capacity for speech, thought, and reason, but are still treated like jokes or, well, monsters. Things to kill indiscriminately. There has been more and more of a concern by Wizards of the Coast, and some members of the community, that the representation of these sentient beings kinda sucks, and there should be a shift in our perspectives of these species. The Drow, or Dark Elves, aren't Lothsworn slavers all, but instead, these Drow are encultured under the goddess of Loth, and as a result, they tend to be slavers or chaotic schemers, but not all Drow. You know, something a little bit more nuanced and understanding of culture. The game does take steps towards this with some characters, and even does the RPG thing where you can randomly spout your political view on the subject, because these are games about choice, people. It definitely takes those steps. But it still represents that goblins, as the whole you see, are murderous little scamps that like to hurt people because they can. Is this a problem? I know my feelings on the matter, but I'm just pointing it out so you know that it's a thing. Default D&D in most of its forms begs a question about which creatures deserve sentience and respect that it would really rather you not ask, because the answers can get uncomfortable. Another major distinction between Tabletop and the game is the rather sober tone the game takes in most situations. D&D Around the Table is being produced by amateurs, the lion's share of the time. These people are going to make jokes or fail on the delivery of a character, or produce a character who's only a joke for a joke's sake, or characters constantly bounce off each other like they're in a sitcom. Baldur's Gate 3 has some of that. Larian has produced some witty writing in the past, and they definitely didn't stop for this game, but the world is self-serious in a way that few DMs will manage to pull off with such consistency. It's finally time to bring in our third piece of D&D for the video, Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, the film adaptation for D&D that came out in early 2023. This movie didn't perform well at all for a myriad reasons, but one thing it absolutely crushes on all fronts is the emotional state of D&D. The characters in the movie are constantly cracking jokes, or making light of their situation, or the danger they're in, or each other. Even some of the villains can't help but be a little bit of a humorist, because Honor Among Thieves' tone captures what it's like to play D&D. It's fun, it's campy, and it's corny, but it's fun. And the cast of the movie is fantastic as well. We have Edgin Darvis, played by Chris Pine as the only character with a last name, and therefore our point of view character, delivering his entire sad backstory from the very beginning of the adventure. Common thing people do when they first play D&D. They can't wait to tell you everything about them, even if it makes no sense to do that right now. Hi, my name's Elena. I'm a wizard who lost her son in the war, and now I'm learning necromancy to hopefully bring him back. I'm terribly sad, and I seek power at the expense of all else. Hopefully the experience won't corrupt me so thoroughly that I am no longer recognizable by my own son. My name's Orc Jordan. Upon meeting our other characters, they all have motivations and backstory elements that they give bits of, but they balance a fine line between clearly being made of cardboard and being fleshed out people. Almost like they're characters being controlled by players who haven't written a lot about them. Each of them have their moments in the story where they get some sort of character development, which is great, that's D&D. Each person has their time to shine. The only thing that's kind of bad practice in Tabletop D&D is obviously making one person a main character. But it does happen, and if someone gave you as much backstory as Edgin has, you'd naturally feel inclined to play with that a lot. You can feel the players at the table in this movie in a way that you just don't in Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is a video game, and one that is profusely concerned with being the most dynamite CRPG ever, as previously stated. This doesn't leave much room for rough edges in storytelling or quirk humor that you'll find in the other mediums. In stark contrast to the one fleshed out character and the cardboard cutouts around him, the characters you find yourself surrounded by in Baldur's Gate are so alive, so rich in representation, opinion, and backstory that you may find yourself amazed by being around them. What Gale has going on is nuts. Karlak? Look at her. She's a bomb-ass bitch, and she is genuinely a great person to be around because she's so cheerful, unlike some of these other dour folks. Speaking of, Shadowheart does get better as the game goes on. Asterion is a JoJo character in the Forgotten Realms, and I love how haughty he is. He is elven arrogance done right. This elven superiority stank bad. This elf superiority stank good. Each character is this way. They all are super distinct and have full opinions and perspectives and backstories. But you know who doesn't here? You. Welcome to another one of the great issues of video games as a medium. Unless your character was created for the game world, you're a little bit of the outs of it, aren't you? Each of these people have rich inner worlds and opinions on what you're getting up to, but your entire personality is represented by the words you pick, and thus, your character only exists because you force them to. All that crap I said earlier about Elena's dead son, I made all that up. Do you think Baldur's Gate's going to do anything with that? Karlak wants to do something in that machine stuck in her chest. Your character wants to do what exactly? Remove the worm in your head? Yeah, so does everyone else. You got anything more distinct? The movie and the game both cannot hope to meet Table D&D on this aspect. Table D&D wants every person at the table to matter the same amount. The group is the main character, not any individual in it. Movies are easier to write with its central character, so one of them is more important than the others. And because computer games cannot account for the infinite variables of you and what choices and assumptions you bring to the table, you are an empty avatar person, whilst everyone else gets to be people. Your surrounding characters are the large ones, not you. The only way it could make you a little more lively is by restricting choice or providing restriction to your role, which it does kind of do. As I said, each character has a backstory and wants and predefined features, but one doesn't work like this. There is one pre-made character which cannot be found in the game naturally. They only exist to be played by you, and that character is the Dark Urge. The Dark Urge is a completely customizable character in every aspect, save one detail. They have a backstory built in. They lost their memory, presumably due to the inciting incident of the game, and now they walk through the world trying to remember who they were before the Mind Flayers grabbed them. The only thing that remains is the Dark Urge, the lust for blood and destruction. And not just of the normal murder that you do in D&D, but the murder of the weak, the children, of those that can't defend themselves. Truly evil behavior. Do you choose to fight it, or submit to it? This character is a genuinely fantastic idea. Because it's Larian's attempt to have their cake and eat it too. A custom character, but with a story created for you to walk down. This isn't a cardboard cutout, it's a character you made, as before, but with a place in the world this time. Just one that you forgot, and now you're trying to recollect while also trying to fight and maybe quell the temptations of the dark urge. Or give in to them. This is a pretty neat idea, and seeing as this game takes 82 hours to finish on average, I'm excited to see if it sticks the landing. Maybe I'll talk about it once I finish. If I finish. Back to the combat, but this time to talk about more emotional differences between the two. These two mediums invite different type of people to the stage in a way that I find very curious. For Table D&D, there is the issue of class complexity and how that affects your experience. Generally speaking, classes without access to magic are simpler than classes that do, meaning these four are easier to handle most of the time. These are the martial classes, and here's how they compare to each other in terms of complexity. You can see that the two most basic are Barbarian and Fighter, also the two most consistent in terms of dealing damage. In Table D&D, these classes are pretty fun because they get to roll dice pretty often and be a consistent help to the team, but they are also, as I said, typically uncomplicated. While the wizard may sit at the table looking over 20 spells trying to figure out what to do with themselves, the barbarian knows what they need to do. Walk up to the guy, smash him. For some people this is fine, but this can just as easily make people bored at the table if they aren't really engaging themselves in the way that the wizard might. Especially with the amount of time it takes for each person to complete their turn, it may be 10, 15, 20 minutes before it's your turn again. And guess what? You walk up, you bonk. But in Baldur's Gate, it's kind of a different story. As I mentioned earlier, video games are machine operated, with code and numbers being their lifeblood. The imagination layer and collaborative storytelling in Table D&D is almost non-existent here. What is most faithfully represented is the combat system, meaning this game rewards people who engage with the combat system way more highly than the role player, at least in comparison to the table game. We have a word for people who engage with the combat layer of D&D and little else, and that's a power gamer. To be clear, if you have a group of power gamers at your table and you're all enjoying the game, that's great. I would never take that from you. But power gamers and, say, the role player would not do well in the same game. And power gaming is very much a frowned upon action in the greater community. But in a video game, that's the power gamer's home. The system rewards absolutely broken builds because it'll never turn itself off and go, okay, that's terribly broken, could you please tone it down so the others can play? If you're playing alone, the only ones to object are your targets as you ruthlessly end them. Not listening much, are ya? Those earlier boring classes are now some of the most consistent, and they're always enjoyable to have around as a result. Instead of being bored waiting for the wizard to finish what they're doing so I can cast Punch, I control up to 4 people on the field by myself. Which means the wizard has a lot of options, and it's genuinely tough to figure out what exactly I should be doing with them every turn. But Karlach and Lae'zel? I know what I need to do with them. Rather than being bored by my single character's lack of action economy, I cheer when it's Karlach's turn, because I know that I'm going to kill one thing this turn, maybe 2 things, and if it's 3 things, it's a good day. It feels better to be Karlach. Quicker dopamine access, baby. And that's not all. The mechanical interactions of the system allow for even more silly shenanigans that the machine has no opinion of as opposed to a person. Quick save before an encounter, throw a potion at the feet of all your characters so everyone gains the effects as the contents of the potion splash over all y'all's feet. Carrying 40 TNT barrels to set up a trap. In real D&D, there's a question of logistics, what is realistically possible, and also thwarting the hard work of your DM. Matthew Colville, in a video about the different kinds of characters, quick aside, Matt Colville, sometimes called Evil Matt, is a pretty good resource for getting into D&D. He has many YouTube videos going back years that are free to access and exist as a resource to learn one kind of DMing style. Everyone's a bit different, take the pieces you like and run with them. But this was the resource I used and consumed greedily before starting my GMing, so I must recommend it to you. He also has his own production company now and is making his own game in light of recent events, so if you would like to support him fiscally, here's how you can do so. Anyway, in his video on the different kinds of players, Matt mentions a type of player called the Mad Scientist, the type of player that picks at the world to try and break it. And that can be a very unenjoyable experience in Table D&D because that person is directly attacking the work the GM did to make the game run smoothly. Remember, this person is supposed to be having fun too, so it's important to respect their work. But now that the GM is a computer, Who is demanding your respect? The computer isn't real. The computer doesn't have feelings. There are many videos, tips, and tricks online on what's the best class and species combo, what are the most broken builds, different tips and tricks to breaking the game, getting the most juice out of your items, successfully get past regulations, and so on. This is obviously rude play in Table D&D, but in the video game setting, where the culture is so different that breaking a game completely apart on purpose is a valid and respected form of play, this is perfectly fine. Finally, onto the multiplayer section. Multiplayer brings Baldur's Gate 3 way closer to D&D by virtue of making it a team game again. People controlling specific units and just generally dorking around, making it harder to take the game seriously. Remember earlier when I said that Baldur's Gate tends to be pretty dour? I think this is the reason for that. The world is trying to be serious for the sake of verisimilitude, but you and yours will supply the funny. I don't know why that was the game's first choice, but sure.
What?
I walked into the room, and it decided the thing to do was to punch the barrel.
Here goes nothing.
And you know, it was on. I'm holding fire. So that didn't go so well. Bringing a friend or friends fixes the tone and seriousness level a great deal, once again bringing it back down to Table D&D's level in terms of tone. The time commitment can't be overstated, though. For the price of $7, I went to the movie theater and watched a fun romp in the world of Forgotten Realms for a little over 2 hours. For the price of free, you could spend some time doing something with friends, or perhaps people from the local shop in a group setting, like bringing people over for board game night, or whatever more athletic people get up to. It's a group activity, where you dedicate 2 to 4 hours of your time, maybe once or twice a month, to catching up with friends. Baldur's Gate 3 costs $60 US. And like most video games, smiles at you while telling you it is multiple days long. It's a different sort of commitment. Rather than a time set aside every week that you don't think about, or 2 hours for one day, it's a big monster of a game, and that's only one playthrough. This thing can be replayed over and over and over and over with different builds, species, characters, and decisions made, and each time you do that, it takes at least 55 hours to see it to the end. Which is why I don't think you're gonna do that. Earlier I mentioned that there are 3 pillars to D&D, with that third one being pretty neglected, and that's exploration. Let's talk about it. Traveling to and from places in D&D used to be handled by a hex crawl, where you'd go from one hexagon on the map to the next, and each time you roll to see what happens until you arrive at your destination. A crunchy way to handle travel. Now the rules are a bit of a loose mess, and it's not even really fun to use the rules it intended if you do manage to keep them all straight in your head. In practice, people just skip the traveling part, going from notable point to notable point and maybe acting out 2 or 3 scenes that happen in the travel for flavor. Honor Among Thieves does something cheeky with this, where every single time they're traveling, every time, it's because they're having a conversation. They aren't tracking food or water or seeing if they're being followed, they're just skipping all of that, and the only time it comes up is when people are having character moments. This is about how it goes in the table version as well, at least around my table. You don't want to describe the sights and sounds of forest, grassland, desert more than a couple of times, so you start skipping travel because it isn't interesting to describe for the 7th time. In keeping with the movie's goal of adapting the emotional play experience of D&D, it skips the stupid travel, just like we would. Not Baldur's Gate 3. From the moment you start the game, you're going to be running into people going, "We're trying to get to Baldur's Gate." So where is it? Well, it's across the game from here. The travel on Baldur's Gate, you will soon find out, is the point of this adventure. And given that the designers made this meticulous world for you to walk through, there's plenty of stuff for you to see, plunder, and experience along the way. Travel is the reason for adventure in a big way, because games can make travel more interesting. It's visually different from place to place, and it was crafted by various narrative and encounter designers to make continued exploration and excitement, rather than just the thing that your characters would be doing between notable points of content, so you're doing it because that's realistic. Rather than some individual who wrote it themselves, where the beauty of the setting depends on how evocative their word choice is, or they're reading it from a book where it's both the word choice of the writers and your ability to deliver it convincingly, this world speaks for itself through the visuals, the sound, and the music, both diegetic and otherwise. This makes moving through it exciting rather than a chore, and that's definitely different and pretty neat. So that's a pretty good view on how these different forms of D&D differ from each other, I think. From the moment I turned on Baldur's Gate 3 to now, 50 hours in, not even done yet, I was constantly coming up with these small differences in how these two mediums differ. So there's a very good chance I forgot something, or there's even more damning distinctions that I've missed. Actually, you know what? Fuck it, let's get into it. Lightning round of things that I thought of, and also Reddit thought of, between my script being finished and now. Conversations lock in one character to the interaction, and your party members may pipe up when something interests them, but it's mostly a one-on-one affair. Partners can't contribute to skill checks and conversations, meaning whoever you pick to start this talk better be suave, unlike in Table D&D where we can freely flow between, almost like a computer isn't the adjudicator of what's possible in that medium. Companions really only interact with the avatar character, and not so much each other outside of very deliberate set pieces. And if something happens to a character, they'll comment to you about it, but never to each other. That's also very gamey. No good inventory management system. For all the alchemical items, potions, arrows, magic items in the game, there's no way to easily store these things. In Table D&D, they straight up discourage you to give out magic items, so they avoided the problem there. But in a video game, a solution would be really nice for this. This game is so horny. They are so horny. I know they said it was a glitch that all the characters are jumping down your pants, and that's pretty funny on its own, but there's just so much sexual energy out here, it's nuts. And not much depth in the relationships as a whole either. It just feels like you're winning your horny prize. If people had issues with Mass Effect back in the day, they better not look over here because they took that ball and ran with it. Truly, we can go on like this for hours if you really wanted to get nitpicky about it, but I want to repeat something I said earlier that is important to note. Do any of these differences make Baldur's Gate 3 a bad game? No. Most of these issues are specific to the medium of video games. It's either something that everything within video games has to grapple with, or a reality of how D&D feels when converted to other systems of experience. These are just facts of the video game, tabletop, or filmic medium that can't be changed, at least without great effort. Many of the best pieces of media within their space push at the boundaries of what is possible in the medium and bring into question if we've really gone as far as we could. Try everything that's possible, or consider if our preconceptions about the medium are holding us back from what's truly possible. All this to say, Baldur's Gate 3 is a very good game that cannot possibly hope to represent D&D perfectly, instead choosing to represent aspects of the system and worlds. Representing the Forgotten Realms as faithfully as it can manage, make a super in-depth tactic system in keeping with other CRPGs, writing larger-than-life characters with deep stories and secrets in keeping with BioWare's legacy of storytelling in the original Baldur's Gate and beyond, and polishing the experience with so much time and money that it legitimately scared other CRPG studios. Larian did their absolute best converting this system into a different genre, different style, and different medium of storytelling. And I think they did a pretty good job. Pivoting away from that, let's keep in mind these smaller studios that exist with RPGs that don't have the luxury of time and IP like D&D, but are nonetheless very good. I've heard Tyranny and Pillars of Eternity, both by Obsidian, are pretty neato. Gonna give them both a try soon. Disco Elysium is a crazy good CRPG that takes out the combat and completely reimagines the skill tree idea into a collection of voices that try to influence your decisions in this extremely political, dialogue-exclusive game that honestly, is fantastic. We also have some classics to give a shot, like the old Baldur's Gates and Planescape Torment, noted as being one of the best CRPGs ever made from my reading. How about the more apocalyptic Wasteland games, which are still being produced, and the original few Fallout games before being purchased by Bethesda? To say nothing of Larian's older Divinity series, there are loads of CRPGs to give a shot if Baldur's Gate 3 was your bag, and I recommend you give it a go. Conclusion time! Mediums affect what stories can be told within them, and each style brings with it pros and cons to what's easy and hard to pull off within a medium. I blather about pros and cons for a bit, and then I finally get to the point with Baldur's Gate 3, the most recent release by Larian Studios, and the biggest foray we've ever had into the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons so far. It is, however, an adaptation of Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop RPG, and thus must make decisions regarding how to represent characters, the party, travel, narrative, sentience, combat, and the emotional state of play that are interesting to examine. And yeah, that's kind of it. This video was really nerdy, wasn't it? I am Super Dude. Thank you for watching. Hey, thanks for making it to the end. I know that was both long and dorky, so I thank you for listening to me ruminate on one of my pet topics for 50 plus minutes. A couple of things. I have a Patreon now, so thanks to these patrons for jumping on before I even made a formal announcement. If you like this video and would like to see more, I mean, I gotta be honest, I'm not gonna be making more videos on this particular subject again, but if you like some of my older videos about what games I love, game design analysis, or more videos on the topic of work representation in games, consider becoming a patron so that you can directly support me with money so I can buy food and pay bills, and that, from my perspective, rocks. Now to answer some old comments that people had. People are wondering how my brother is doing in college. Here's an image he sent me. Seems to be doing fine. And to that one individual who asked if my fiance did get me that big root box for my birthday, she did. It's quite useful for storing all the stuff in one place rather than carrying 4 different root boxes, so if you own all of them, it's useful. Though you do need to put each individual piece together yourself with hobby hammer, wood glue, and all the fixins, so it's a bit of an adult Lego situation. Prepare for a project when you get this. And yeah, again, thank you very much for watching this very dorky thing. And, well, I hope you enjoyed it, because I'm never doing it again. Thank you. See you around.